Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Early Childhood Voices Conference. My name is Dr. Rachel Karem, and today I'll be sharing with you our presentation, Understanding Bilingual Children's Language Use Using Cross-Linguistic Analysis. This work was supported by my colleagues as well, Dr. Karla Washington and Dr. Catherine Crow. We have a few disclosures here for us today before we get started. Dr. Karla Washington is the principal investigator on a National Institute of Health research grant. I myself was a doctoral scholar, a part of a United States Department of Education grant at the time this work was completed, and funding was provided by an endowment to the Jamaican Creole Language Project for research startup funds to Dr. Karla Washington. Setting the stage for us here a bit, it's important for us to know that more than half of the world's population is multilingual. So in fact, multilingualism is not the exception, but rather the norm, and children are fully capable of acquiring multiple languages. It's also important for us to know, particularly in contexts, say, such as the United States, that there is a growing proportion of multilingual children in educational settings, and this requires innovative practices for practitioners to provide accurate and appropriate service, and particularly for children who may speak a language different than the practitioner. We also see an overwhelming body of research that indicates that bilingual children are particularly at risk for misdiagnosis. And this misdiagnosis being under-identification as well as over-identification of speech and language disorders can occur because patterns between typical dual language development, so patterns that we see in children as they're typically acquiring multiple languages, can overlap with indicators that we see in language disorders in monolingual English speakers. So let's take the example here. Here we have an example using the languages English and Jamaican Creole. Now on the far left, we see a production that would be in Jamaican Creole, "De baby a cry." In English, this translation would be, "The baby is crying." So say we have a bilingual child who speaks Jamaican Creole and English, we might observe language interaction, typical and natural language interaction taking place that could be misidentified as an indicator of language disorder when in fact it is highly rule governed and appropriate given the knowledge of all of the languages that the child knows. So here the child might produce "De baby a crying." We can see features of Jamaican Creole in blue, and we can see features of English in purple. Now, if I, as an English-speaking speech-language pathologist, didn't have a thorough understanding of the language structure of Jamaican Creole, I may inaccurately identify, oh, this child is missing the is form, the auxiliary be form, when in fact, again, if I have that knowledge of Jamaican Creole, I can see that the child has provided a marker of present progressive or an aspect marker in the case for Jamaican Creole, crying. So here again, we can see often a source of misdiagnosis is children's natural language interaction that occurs between two languages. Now, the study that I'll be describing today focuses on the Jamaican context. It's important for us to know that Jamaicans are a growing population across the globe and represent upwards to 20% of Caribbean-born immigrants in the United States alone. It's also important for us to understand that we are defining Jamaican Creole as an independent Creole language in its own rights with West African and English origins. And this definition is also supported by the Jamaican Language Unit of the University of the West Indies. We know that Jamaican children are particularly at risk for misdiagnosis in English-dominant communities due to the natural relationship and historical relationship between Jamaican Creole and English. The aim of this study was using the Index of Productive Syntax, a clinical tool, and token-based analyses, we sought to quantify and characterize cross-linguistic interactions occurring in the spontaneous productions of Jamaican Creole and English bilingual preschoolers. For this particular study, we included 61 Jamaican Creole and English bilingual preschoolers. They were aged from 4 years, 0 months to 5 years and 11 months, and they were identified as typically developing based on a converging concern approach, where two sources identified that there were no concerns present, be it a teacher or SLP and a parent. Now, data included play-based language samples where children were instructed to play for 15 minutes in length. And it's important for us to note that language-specific stimuli, such as you see the Dora dollhouse for Jamaican Creole presentation and a castle for the English presentation, were used, as well as language-specific elicitors in Jamaican Creole and English. So this was designed to support children in using the particular target language for the context. Children were reminded using gentle reminders as well. Remember, I want you to speak to me in English, say if this were the English administration. And for data analysis purposes, a minimum of 50 utterances was required. So in order to conduct a thorough and complete cross-linguistic analysis, our data coding included 4 steps. The first step was initially to tag cross-linguistic interactions across the entire sample that would then be later analyzed, and this was done using an established protocol that was developed from guidance documents that provided information about the linguistic structures of both Jamaican Creole and of English, as well as information that we obtained from adult models from the same local community. And this was done through similar assessment tasks in related work. Our coding protocol was also confirmed and supported by the Jamaican language unit of the University of the West Indies. Our second step was then to identify at the within utterance level where features from 2 languages were present in a single utterance. And this was done by way of using a clinical tool, the index of productive syntax, to localize which structures were involved, as well as token-based analyses to obtain a rate. Our third step was then to apply a cross-utterance analyses where features were present from 2 languages across utterances in the entire sample. And using token-based analysis, this supported us in obtaining a rate in which code mixing was occurring or cross-linguistic interaction was occurring. And lastly, we underwent temporal analysis. This gave us information about the timing that cross-linguistic interactions occurred, be it at the beginning, middle, or end of the language sample. At the within-utterance analysis, to expand on the index of productive syntax, a highly relevant clinical tool that has recently been adapted to support efficiency of clinical use. This tool, first, we were able to identify via our tagging, did an interaction occur? And then we could use the guidelines from the Ibsen manual to tag where these features were occurring or to localize which structures were involved in cross-linguistic interaction. So was it occurring at the verb phrase? Was it occurring at the noun phrase, say perhaps with a plural form? Perhaps in the Jamaican context, if a child said babies, we know that that is going to be a form of English cross-linguistic interaction in the Jamaican context. As in Jamaican Creole, the plural marker would be baby dem and not a bound speech sound or morpheme of the plural S, babies. Now, at the within utterance level, we were also able to identify what underlied children's cross-linguistic interactions, or what was the source of the cross-linguistic interaction, and able to obtain a quantifiable rate using token-based analysis. So here, the number of cross-linguistic tokens was divided by the total number of tokens or words. So here in this example, we have in the English context, the baby drop down. Now that would be 4 tokens total, and we have 1 token, so 1 out of 4, 25%. That is a cross-linguistic token. Here, we can also identify the source. There are 2 sources here. So we see a lexical or vocabulary source in that the child is saying drop, common in the Jamaican context, but not common in the English context, instead of fell or falls. And morphologically, we can see here that the child is producing 0 marking of the 3rd person present tense in saying drop instead of drops. And again, ultimately, we're seeing this rate of cross-linguistic interaction that's occurring at the within utterance level. At the across-utterance analysis level, again, we were able to obtain a proportion of utterances that included cross-linguistic interactions. And this was obtained by taking the total number of utterances that included interactions, so say in the example, 31 utterances, out of the total number of utterances in the transcript. So in the example, 80 utterances, that helps us receive a rate of 38.8%. So again, this supported us in quantifying the proportion of cross-linguistic interaction across the sample. Lastly, our temporal analysis, again, supported us in being able to identify the time that the cross-linguistic interaction occurred at the beginning, middle, or end of the sample. So beginning was quantified as the initial 32%, middle as the middle 36%, and end as the final 32%. And again, this information was important for us to have important clinical implications for where cross-linguistic interactions were occurring in the sample. So results. We found that our item analysis using the clinical tool, the Index of Productive Syntax, that a large percentage of the Ibsen structures were tagged at least once across all children. So we can see 92.9% of Ibsen structures in the Jamaican Creole context and 98.2% of the Ibsen structures in the English context. So this tells us that there is a very high likelihood that these patterns of cross-linguistic interaction are going to surface using this particular clinical tool. And this is important information for practitioners to know so that they can accurately identify or even provide credit for forms that are being utilized across the child's spoken languages. Using a paired samples t-test, we also noted that there were significant differences between the mean rate of Ibsen structures used across the children's languages, with higher rates of use in Jamaican Creole. Regarding our results for language domains, we were able to determine that there were differences within the Jamaican Creole context as well as within the English context for which features were underlying children's cross-linguistic interactions. Across both languages, we saw that the domain of lexical influences or vocabulary influences was the least often domain underlying children's cross-linguistic interactions. And this could be due to the historical relationship between the two language pairings and the overlap of lexical knowledge within the children's languages. Now, in the English context, we did see that phonological cross-linguistic features, meaning Jamaican Creole, impacting English production was highly occurring. One example of this might be for use of th in the English context if a child uses t. So, for example, teat instead of teeth. Now, we also saw across languages that language domains that were highly involved, and this is consistent with other forms of literature, what we have seen in other language pairings as well, were that word meaning and word order were also highly involved across both contexts, but particularly in the Jamaican Creole context. Now, across children's language samples, we also saw similar patterns with higher rates of code mixing or cross-linguistic influence being realized in the Jamaican context. Here we see an average of about 44.9%, but we also see that cross-linguistic influence or Jamaican Creole features coming into an English-speaking context were also realized at an average rate of 27.8%. Now, there could be a variety of different reasons that we saw the differences between the languages that we did, some being societal and cultural influences of how the languages are used within the particular community. For example, Jamaican Creole is more often used in informal or familial contexts, while English is more often used in formal or educational contexts. And our testing environment was more of an educational context. So that could be some of the reasons for those outcomes, or some influencing factors for those outcomes. Now, as far as the timing of children's cross-linguistic interactions that were occurring in their samples, we saw the highest proportion of cross-linguistic interaction in the sample was occurring at the middle or at the end of the sample. And this has important clinical implications for us, where we can determine that a child is going to be more naturalistically communicating as the language sample continues. It may be more cognitively demanding for a child to attempt to separate their languages and use only one language, as this is not necessarily a naturalistic form of bilingual communication. Naturally, bilingual children use all of their languages to support their communication. So this is important for practitioners to know. And a few additional clinical implications for us here. So it's important for educators to understand that this study documents, as well as a wealth of literature, that bidirectional language interaction is a natural phenomenon and is going to occur. It does not mean that a child is confused in using his or her language, but it implies to us that a naturalistic form of communication is for bilingual children to use all of their language knowledge and all of their language strengths, and that languages naturally interact also dependent upon the linguistic structure of each language. It also helps us know that we need to have different considerations for bilingual versus monolingual assessment contexts. So I mentioned the piece of a cognitive load when we ask children to, in an unnatural way, separate their languages. So here again, this information can be used to support our understanding and support development of clinical tools to ensure that we are accurately capturing all of the strengths of the bilingual child. I want to thank you for your time today and your very kind attention. And please do not hesitate to reach out to myself or any of my fellow co-authors with questions or sharing any of your thoughts with us. Thank you.